Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. It's Thursday night. I'm here with the contest crew post CQ WPX contest. I have half the crew with me tonight: Randy Thompson, K5ZD, and Dan Craig, N6MJ. Scott and Chris couldn't join us. But we have a newcomer, Tim Coker, N6WIN, and he operated with Chris Hurlbut this past weekend at KM7W. So he's here to report on the WPX efforts at that station. Welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Thanks, Kevin.
So, Dan, why don't we start with you? I know you're at ND7K per usual. I got you in the log a couple times. You sounded great. Tell me about the efforts there.
So I was operating from ND7K single up, and I've said before on the podcast that I'm your typical appliance operator. Now Tim knows that's semi-true, but there are I'm complete lid. And so Tim is the station owner down there, and he actually wasn't there. And so I had the station all to myself. I had to, if anything went wrong, it was up to me to fix it. I was a little bit nervous about that. But to be honest, everything worked great. The station was set up when I got there. I had a few things I had to switch around. But the antennas, the software, the MOAS, everything that could have gone right went right for me. And the contest itself was a breeze.
So we're going to dig into more of that in a minute, but I've got to say, impressive that you're able to kick the station owner out and operate for the weekend. Good job with that.
Yeah.
And Tim, what about you? You got kicked out. You went to Montana.
Yeah, so Dan knows that my true passion is basically in station building and also hosting multi-ops. I don't really fashion myself a single operator any longer. I've had some medical issues that have caused a retirement from my old career work. And I've realized that it doesn't work well with long-term single op operating, even through a weekend. And so multi-ops have become my thing. So with Dan qualifying for WRTC to get he and Chris out to England in 2026, I had an opportunity to go up to Yarmouth, where Chris, KM7W, KL9A, has a property that I've actually got a little land from him for. And it was a really nice experience. It was great to be able to hand the reins completely off to Dan. I did offer him, if I need to cancel this trip, if you don't feel confident, I will. But Dan took some opportunity to learn the station previous to my traveling up to Montana, and he did a great job setting it up. He had a few hurdles to work through, but he studied, he remembered stuff, and he did great. So it was actually an excellent opportunity for both of us to grow and for me to see Chris's station up in Yarmouth, Montana.
So, Tim, before we get too far into this, who else was there other than yourself and Chris Hurlbut?
Yeah, so Levi was there, K6JO, and Mike, a long-term friend of Chris, another ham operator, was up there. I have to look up his call. I've got to admit, I tend to do things on first-name basis. It was a holdover from my old department. We basically knew each other by last name basis. To know each other's first name was actually something that meant we were actual friends, colleagues that respected one another more so. So Mike was up there, and of course, Chris. I did most of the camp cooking, less operating. The guys loved that, of course. Got them a lot of button chair time, great openings. I think it worked out as a great mix for all of us.
Well, I saw photos of the food. It looks like you did a good job.
Thank you.
And Randy, what about yourself? I know you're down in the Caribbean soaking up the sun at least part of the week.
Yes. Well, I had the pleasure of doing multi-single from Victor 47 Tango in St. Kitts Island. Was with Andy N2NT and Zoli HA1AG. Zoli and I met up in JFK Airport on Tuesday morning, and we all flew down. Andy showed up a little bit after we did, and so that worked out perfectly. We had the best week of weather I've ever seen in St. Kitts. It was spectacular the whole time. And then we didn't have a lot of stuff that was broken, so we did some station work, fixed the main projects that Andy wanted to get done, and then we did the contest, which the conditions were just amazing. That's for the first 30 hours or so. Had a great time, ended up with 33 million points, multi-single.
So Randy, since we've heard before what's going on at ND7K, and Chris has talked a little bit about Montana, tell me about the working conditions there at St. Kitts?
So V47T is on top of, I don't want to call it a mountain, but it's on top of a hill. It's about a mile inland from the ocean. It's about 1,000 feet up, maybe a little bit more. So spectacular views when you look out from the station north to the USA and then northeast towards Europe. So spectacular takeoff angles for the prime location or prime directions. And there's monobanders on there's 3 towers with monobanders on 40 through 10. There's some antenna selection, so we can have antennas pointed at both USA and Europe at the same time, that kind of thing. The shack is a very small concrete blockhouse, so it's not the most comfortable place to operate, especially with 3 people in a room that's probably really designed for 1.5 people. But we squeezed in there, and we had set up 2 radios, and it's worth going and putting up with all the trouble to get there and take the 4-wheel drive up the hill to get to the station and so on, because once you're there, everyone is loud. It is one of the best radio locations I've ever been to.
And Randy, I'm sure you said this and I missed it. Whose station is it?
Andy, November 2, November Tango, is really the owner of the station. He makes sure that everything is working or keeps working or gets fixed, that kind of thing. He's been down there, I think he said 25 times. So he's been making the trip for more than 10 years.
And was this the first time for you operating from V47T?
No, this was the 5th time for me. So I've done a couple of single op efforts from there and then some multi-ops.
So you may have seen, I did a quick survey that I sent to people that were doing what I'm calling contest de-expeditions. You can correct me if there's a better name for that. But I had asked the question about why people pick a location, and I was surprised that the number one answer was past operating experience from that location.
There's so much uncertainty when you travel for a contest. So when you find a place that's good and you understand kind of what's required or what you're going to be getting into or what you need to bring, all those kind of things that reduce uncertainty, it makes it a lot easier to come back again. And when you find a really good location, it doesn't matter whether there's uncertainty, you come back again anyway.
And Tim, give us the update on Montana, because I know Chris continues to make improvements there, and I'm sure he did some work prior to the WPX. What was the situation there?
Yeah, so Chris was working very hard months in advance to get to his MOAS system working. We have a little group chat going of some friends, and Bill W9KKN is on that. And to say that there were a billion texts between Chris and Bill would be an understatement. The MOAS system is very important, very complex, and Chris took upon mastering that, which I thought was immensely useful. He does not have big antennas there yet. There was a couple of spider beams. Mike, Kilo 7 November Tango, was there with us, and he brought over a spider beam that we were able to put up at approximately 50 feet, 50. Chris's, I believe, only went up to 30 or 35, but that allowed us dual directions so that with our multi-single, we could have an in-band operator that could use that MOAS system to not only work one direction, but 2 direction as his choosing. And the run operator could do the same. That was huge. Chris had just done a 4-square using K3LR's old 40-meter OWA elements that he put up a lot of full-size radials, integrating them together, put in a lot of work on in-band verticals using an old C3S that I gave him. And he had some beverage antennas that had already been up. All of that came together to work very well. We were not very loud necessarily at all times, but the station improvements that he made on the inside of the station really gave us all the sense that we were louder than we were. I mean, it's a couple of spider beams on a hilltop. It's not the biggest signal. But because we were so well equipped inside and with so many receive and in-band options, it almost made it feel like I was back home at ND7K. Of course, until the people didn't always answer us in the pileups.
Well, you guys were plenty loud in the Caribbean. It seemed like every time I tuned across and heard KM7W, you were plenty loud.
Well, that's good. I'm going to let Chris know that so that he can keep CQing and making those points he made. We ended up with 4,200 Qs. That was something else. We almost hit the W7 record that we were shooting for, which is an old NK7U, Joe Rudy's record from probably out in Oregon. It was most likely his QTH at that time. That's a big monster station. So Chris really did a great job of setting the station up and challenging us to believe that we were, at a bigger station than we were. And when that station comes to fruition, it is going to absolutely give ND7K a challenge in each contest.
Well, I've got to say, it was impressive watching the online scoreboard because Randy and Dan were near the top of the scoreboard all the time, did really well. But I was really surprised, especially after Chris downplayed the antenna situation in Montana, how high up in the rankings you guys were.
Yeah, Chris challenged us to operate like we were champions, and I believe that is that's the way we do it at ND7K when we have a multi-op. Believe you're louder than you are, and if you don't believe you can win, well, then you're not going to win. K5TR, on the other hand, run away with it. That's an amazing crew and station down there. We did not feel like we left anything on the table, though. Within reason, of course. There's always errors and things you could do better. But the group came together very well, and Chris led us to a very nice conclusion, especially considering those limited antennas he currently today has.
Well, that's the amazing thing. 4,000 QSOs with 2 spider beams at 30 and 50 feet. That location, and you guys did a good job operating to do that.
Thank you.
And Dan, how was the start from ND7K? I heard lots of reports online about how great the propagation was Friday night and Saturday.
Yeah, so I started on 10 and 15, running mostly Asia, but I did the whole point the antennas in 6 directions trick on 10 meters at the beginning. So I had every direction covered, and then I was also running on 15 doing 2B SIQ, and that ended up working out quite well. I got off to a really good start, like you said. I think the rate topped out to a little bit over 270 for an hour, which is very respectable in a contest like this. So I was very, very pleased with that. And like you said, the propagation that first day was just absolutely magic. Leading into that next morning, when 10 meters opened up in the morning, it's not always great propagation at this time of the year, especially from Arizona into Europe on 10. But this on Saturday, I was running over 100 an hour of straight Europeans, and that really helped the score a lot, because one thing that usually holds us back on the West Coast is the inability to work enough multipliers, because we can't work enough Europeans to get those mults. And when you look at the final scores, I think I had close to 1,400 mults overall, and that was right up there with the other top scoring single ops. And that was all attributable to that first day in the European propagation. It was pretty cool.
I'm always cognizant of who's listening to this, and they're not always experienced contesters like yourself. I mean, we know that a lot of people listening to the show just trying to pick up tips. And your comment, Dan, makes me recall, I think, something that Chris said, that your goal in every contest is to have a strong first hour. Is that right? That's where you want to be all the time?
I think that's key for me anyway, because usually from the West Coast in particular, like in DX contests, like that's our bread and butter, is when we can finally work a lot of JAs, because there's not enough JAs around to keep the rate up all the time. But that first hour, first 2 hours maybe, that's when you actually get rate in that direction. And that's key to kind of put yourself ahead. That's one of the cool things about this contest is it's a serial number contest. So you have a general idea of how you're doing against your competition. And of course, you got the online scoreboard too, so you can see it there as well. But it's always fun to, give out higher numbers than the other guy, just to kind of psych him out a little bit. So I think that's where, getting that big first hour helps your ego a little bit too,
Randy, who started at the in the chair at V47T?
So I did the first hour, and we had 279 in the first hour, which is by far our best hour of the weekend, because with the serial numbers, as you go along, the numbers get bigger. And as the numbers get bigger, people need to ask for more repeats. And then there's another thing that starts to happen on Saturday afternoon, and especially into Sunday as the numbers get really big, is people have to tell you that you have a really big number. So that takes a certain amount of time. Then they have to repeat it back to you. So invariably people go, oh, well, thank you for the 596784. Please copy. And then they'll give you their number. So there's a lot of extra overhead that, say, in a contest like the Worldwide, where everybody, it's just CQ zone, people generally know what it is. You can kind of crank things through pretty fast. So that first hour is really big. And from then on, most of our hours, a really big hour for us would be like 220, 230. We had a couple of those. We had a bunch right around in the 190 to 200 range. Um, but the big event for us in the contest was we had a great first 24 hours. We had like 4,300 contacts in the first 24 hours, which is awesome. We were thinking, wow, this is going to be massive. And on the wee hours on Sunday morning, we're running Europeans on 20, and we had 3 hours that were pretty good. We were well over 100, and Europeans are calling, and they're getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and then all of a sudden, there's nobody on the band. 20 meters completely empty. So we made 7,500 contacts, and we had an hour where we made 35 Qs. And we backed that up with an hour of 51. And this was not because we weren't trying. It just was gone. And the bands were really broken, and they stayed half broken for really until about noon for us. It just all this fantastic propagation the first night, where at 4 a.m, there's all these Russians and Chinese stations on 15 that were just booming in. The next morning, there's nothing. None of the deep openings into Russia or anything, not even Northern Europe. So it really ended up just being kind of the Italian QSO party on Sunday morning until finally noon. And by that time, it was Easter. People were in Europe were kind of getting tired of the contest, or had moved on to the low bands, and there wasn't as much activity from the U.S. as normal. And things just were really tough in the morning, and then kind of recovered towards the end. So we were very happy. We broke the North American record, but man, why can't we have a contest where we have 2 days that are good in a row and not just one?
So Randy, I'm curious, when you're used to running those big hours and then you get an hour where there's 35, do you stop running or do you just keep CQing?
Number one, you're kind of like, what happened? So you try CQing and there's no answer. And it's weird. When you're driving on the freeway and you're going 65 miles an hour and then you pull off at the exit and you have to go 30 through the town, it's the same feeling. When you're used to running, guys, and all of a sudden there's nobody to work anymore, you just feel like, well, what happened? No one's answering me. I keep calling CQ and no one's answering me. Maybe I should change the bands. Oh, no one's answering me. Part of that 35 hours, somebody moved us to 160. So that was 2 QSOs on 160. That's how desperate and broken the bands were, because normally you shouldn't really have to be on 160 in this contest. So it was just very strange to have it crash that hard.
And Tim, what about in Montana? What were the rates like there?
Yeah, so the rates were surprisingly good for us, considering the equipment. We were very happy that first 24 hours, I think, as everybody reports on 3830. And then the event occurred. It's one that I'll remember because at that point I was off the cooking duties, and it's Tim, it's your turn to sit down and do some button chair time, do what the teammates need for you to do, because they've all been awake and you've been sleeping to cook for us. So, okay, well, I've never operated in Montana before, but okay, what's the plan? I'm asking Chris. Chris has got all the experience. So I sit down. I'm on the in band, if I recall correctly, and things just they're not what I've been seeing the boys putting in the log. So I'm personally thinking, like, what the heck? I finally get that helm command, if you will, on Sunday, and what just happened?
And you're taking it personally, right?
So, yeah. I'm like, well, I think I'm just maybe I'm not meant to be up here or something. So it's one of those feelings I think every contester has had, like, geez, what's occurring right now, and what do I do to fix this? I look at the equipment, everything's working fine. We're doing what the right stuff is. I opened the contest the first hours and things were great. So it's not an equipment problem, but okay, clearly the bands are taking a turn for the worse, and it's really bad right now, like Randy just described. So we do the norm. I think that most good multi person on like a multi singles doing with in band, and that is, hey, go check out those other bands. Is this a problem just on 20 right now? Is the problem on 15? Where should we be? And the last thing you want to do is wake up your most experienced guy from the sleep that he actually needs. So we started making some decisions and feeling out on different bands. And then basically the only answer was, let's just try different stuff to see what sticks. Eventually, we started getting some traction. Some USA's answering us. A little bit of Europe comes back, and then the JAs start coming in. But it wasn't like before. But we were able to continue logging queues, and as the bands recovered, things became evident. Like, okay, I see what we've just gone through. And the only thing you can do is look for traction. Where can you be? Where's the best spot now? You don't have a roadmap, right? You just have experience to go on, and this is a new contest. For us, many of us, new location. K6JO and I hadn't been up there. So it was definitely that moment of, what do I do so that I don't let down the crew?
So when this kind of thing happens, if you're a single op in WPX, you take a break and go take a nap or something. Yeah. But as a multi-op, you have no choice. You have to persevere. And you also have to realize everybody else was going through the same thing. So even though we had a 35-hour, something which sounds pretty terrible, hey man, we didn't want to give up any QSOs to anybody else. So you're right. You have no choice but to call CQ or tune around a little bit.
So Dan, you were the single op. What did you do?
Like Randy said, I had the opportunity to take a nap at that point, which is what I did. And I was lucky in the fact that it's really hard to figure out off times in this contest in general. And this year was even harder because the rates were so good. But in the back of my mind, what I was thinking was that on Sunday, we have Easter coming up. It is going to slow the rate down a bit. And I wanted to be done early. And that came to fruition. I think I made my last queue around 1930 Zulu, and I was off the air for the rest of the contest. And looking back and looking at whatever else I read after that time, I think it was actually the right decision. And it feels good to actually get it right this time, because I can tell you there's been many times in the past where I didn't get it right, and then you lose positions on the scoreboard. And this time, everything went as planned, and I was able to make the right decisions when it came to the off times.
Randy and Tim, how did you break up your time?
At V47T, we decided we were going to do 2-hour shifts. And what it really ended up being was kind of a tag team match. So you would operate, and then when you get to the place where it's like, we probably had to change bands now, or you'd get tired of operating, you would just tag the guy next to you and say, okay, you take over. And so we didn't have a hard schedule. It was mostly just kind of sharing. And this is one of the great things about a 3-person multi-single. Everybody's going to get plenty of operating. It's great operating with good guys because you don't have to worry about, well, if I get up we're going to be losing. I mean, the other guys are better than I am. So they're going to do their part. And so it becomes pretty much a matter of, hey, I'm going to concentrate really hard when I'm on. And then when I can't take it anymore, tag the next guy in and go take a break.
So I guess that raises the question for me, Randy. When you have a team, let's say of 3 people, you're suggesting that maybe everybody's equal. But is there a strategy on who you put in the chair first? Is it the best person in the chair first and the best person to close, or do you think about it that way?
I guess this is where ego can be dangerous, right? Sometimes you have guys who think that they should deserve that. All I know is I was out in the car watching something on Netflix or whatever, and the guys told me, hey, we decided you're going to operate first. So, okay, I'll do that. I'm never going to say no to that. And then the same thing at the end. It just kind of worked out that I was the guy at the end of the contest. And there's just a lot of adrenaline, both of those hours, the beginning hour and then the end hour has got all kinds of weird frustration because you're trying to go as fast as you can. And then maybe people answer you, maybe they don't. It's like, please call me, to make as many cues as you can. But as far as strategy goes, there's no question. Oftentimes you don't have an equal team, or you have people who are different skills. And it does make sense to try to either let people operate at times or bands that they really like or are interested in or have special skills for, or just put the good guys on at the time where you really need to crank the rate, and have guys fill in at other times. It's really up to the team to decide. In our particular case, we didn't really have a leader. There was not somebody who was calling the shots. It just kind of another thing when you operate with guys who have a lot of experience, you can pretty much tell what's going on and when something needs to change. And so it doesn't take very long conversations to work things out.
And Tim, what about Montana? How did that dynamic work? You'd mentioned you were the first time there. Sounds like Levi first time there. How did the team come together to make those decisions?
Yeah, so 3/4 of the team has been together through many different events previous. I'm big on pecking order. It's just something that came from our career. Some guys are better than other guys. That's the reality, right? It's never quite equal. I think that's a utopia that it doesn't quite exist usually. So for us, it's much like ND7K. Whenever we host a multi over at ND7K, I recognize the fact that Dan N6MJ is a world champion. He's won many, many different things. I recognize also that many of the operators that graciously, thankfully, come to ND7K are world-class operators too. But we do have to have a captain. And so Dan is appointed as the station captain. That makes him make some tough decisions, some decisions that sometimes make it hard on the friendship part. And so I let the guys know, once they get here, hey, this is the way that it is, guys. Just because you've done something somewhere doesn't mean you will open with the 20-meter opening or something. It doesn't mean that you are also going to get the worst shifts because you're new. What you've brought to the table, Dan will look at, and he will schedule as such. And so I bring that up because up in Montana, Chris, he's clearly the best operator. There's no doubt about it. Levi is an excellent runner. Tim, myself, I'm a great guy at in-band. Mike was bringing lots and lots of decades of radio experience to the table. And so what Chris asked me to do was, hey, I want you to open the contest on in-band so that Mike can see what a great in-band looks like. And I want you to take the opportunity to sometimes slow down that in-band rate or picking off folks and let Mike know what you're doing. I want Levi to open up because he is a hellacious runner. He is great at that. And Chris, being the best operator out of all of us, said, I can't be on the radio. I'm the guy that knows this station. I have to be available to fix things as they come up. And so we knew, we may not open with the, who's going to determine it, right? What's the right decision to make? I think Chris was making the absolute best decision. Gave me an opportunity to do what I do, and that is the in-band and be a training officer like I was by my career work. And we talked beforehand about egos. If you are not given some opening, you should have come here with the experience to be given that opening. And that's the hard reality, I think, of a very successful team in anything, is the realization that not everybody gets a trophy. And so Chris very much embraces that, as does Dan and I. And we bridge that with the reality of, hey, we want guys to come back too, though. If we just subjugate somebody to one thing like we've done in the past and we actually regret, it's not the right call. And so it's also not the right call, and I'll throw up on Dan here. We love winning this one over Dan. I'm sure he knows what I'm about to say. We don't want to do 2 hours on and 2 hours off. Guys need sleep. Guys need to be able to think about medical issues with folks, especially as the, teams are aging, right? And so we made some decisions about who was going to do what ahead of time. And it allowed us, though, as a team to realize that everybody was truly important, regardless of operating or knowledge of the propagation skills. And so we worked that out as a team ahead of time. And I think that we all basically embraced it. There was a written schedule for the first 24 hours. And then after that, it was like, hey, guys, at that point, you know each other, you know the skills, take care of one another as teammates.
Yeah, there's a lot of great management lessons in that, and team organizing, and especially to get it all on the table up front. That's the best way to deal with the ego issues, because you don't want guys feeling like, oh, well, why does he get to do that and not me, that kind of stuff. You just squash it right up front. And I agree with Chris in that as the station owner, sometimes you have to let the other guys operate because you just don't know what's going to happen. But if it happens in the beginning, it's going to be bad. So be ready to fix.
So Tim, in that you said that Chris asked you to show Mike what a great in-band operator looked like. What does a great in-band operator look like?
Somebody who's willing to discuss ahead of time failures in life, so that when decisions have to be made, to have somebody take off their headphones and basically say, "What are you doing right now? This is the path." That is able to be accepted. It's very hard to take criticism. I took some criticism earlier today in my current career, and it was hard to accept it, but I realized that I needed to improve. To be able to be understood, that when I say, "Hey, take off your headphones. Hey, man, that was amazing. Do you understand what you just did? I mean, you have come so far in 24 hours." That it wasn't seen as just, some guy just blowing smoke, that it was actually earned. And when that occurred in our group this weekend, the next thing I knew, somebody that wasn't used to in-band, oh man, Sunday, he's just packing them away, and he's challenging a great runner because he had the motivation to do this, even though that's not what he's used to. And so in this case, Mike did have a little bit of a hard time with me at first, and I understood it. We had some off time together. I apologized to him. I says, "Hey, man, it's nothing personal. I get all kinds of life lessons from Dan and Chris and so forth about operating, right? But when you did do that, great. That was something else. And I got to be honest, you learned that faster than some other folks have. And so that motivation and that realization of, hey, I do want to improve and I want to be a better team member, I really took part, and we could give that slot to our newest in-band operator, if you will, on Sunday and really lean on him. And so people were able to go to sleep and trust, like Randy said, it's like, hey, I can go to sleep and trust this guy to do this, or these guys, whatever their role was. So it's just a lot of, psychology, and hopefully the training officer is willing to say, hey, guess how I learned this? I messed up too, and we're all going to mess up, but how are we going to take that criticism? Are we going to improve, or are we just going to say, well, I've had all these decades of experience, I don't care? And I think we've all met people in life like that.
Let's talk about what we mean by in-band, because maybe not everybody understands that. And also why it's so hard. So often you'll have a guy who's running on a band. Let's say he's on 14155 and he's working people as fast as he can. The in-band station is generally another radio station also on the same band on 20 meters, for example, and it might be tuning up at 14225 or 250 or something like that. And it hears a new station or finds a station that hasn't been worked before. It has to try to time it out so that it answers that guy up at 14250 at a time when the runner is not transmitting. And you can immediately see the tension here, because the runner's trying to go as fast as possible, and you've got an in-band guy trying to sneak stuff in where he needs to get a call sign across, he needs to get a number across, he needs to hope the guy he's working doesn't ask for a repeat, or that's another transmission or two, and try to do this without breaking the rhythm on the run station. There's all kinds of different philosophies about how to do this. Who gets priority when they both push the foot switch, that kind of thing. And some people can really handle it well. They can sense, they can sense what's going on the other radio and give some space to be able to finish the QSO on the in-band station. Some people can't. And some people just go absolutely nuts when they're being interrupted by this in-band guy. So it takes a certain personality to do it, and especially for the in-band station, because he's often having to try to maneuver around the run station, but also just to get used to or develop a feel for how to do it. But why do people go to all this trouble? Because you can add another 30, or maybe even I won't say 50. 50 could be possible, but you'll add another 30 to 50 QSOs to a really big run hour just by working other people at the same time in the spaces. So it's a little bit like the 2B SIQ thing, except by two guys on the same band. And there are some stations in Europe have gone so far, they'll have two in-band stations, which is kind of boggles the mind. But again, it's all a matter of trying to use every possible transmitting second that you can to work someone.
Yeah, Randy's spot on. We've been approached by different stations that we've operated on. Chris and I, Dan and I, how do I improve for our in-band teams? Because we do get to show the case that ability to add QSOs, to add points and multipliers by use of a good runner and a good in-band partner. And oftentimes the answer is, I need audio sharing. I need to be able to have the opportunity to listen to what my partner's doing, whether that's the runner or the in-band operator. And sometimes the right answer at the moment is simply for both operators to listen to that important QSO on the runner station. Sometimes it's also the important thing for the runner to come over and help me break down what that juicy multiplier is saying that we absolutely need. At other times, we need to listen to our own audio streams, and sometimes one or the other is listening to both audio streams. And so we, as partners, can have the opportunity to help one another increase the rate overall and the points, or I like to call it point factor, from some of the shooting competitions that my career job was involved in. We need to find out what that right relationship is. And it's very important, too, for whether it be the run operator or the in-band operator to remind his or her partner, hey, was that the right call for the team? Was that the right call for how we're going to score points at this moment? If you just trounced all over me when I needed in this contest to hear a serial number, you've just wasted time. And time is the thing that we're always, not given back, in so many walks of life, right? So we would call each other out this weekend up in Montana. And the Gab file is probably not one that everybody should see because of the words that we're using to describe, like, what are you doing? And so it really is. I mean, I've heard of station operators or station owners. I think they told W6 Yankee India and Dan N6MJ, we try to do what you boys did in sweepstakes with the 3 radio station, doing in-band and various sharing and stuff and lockouts and prioritizations like Randy pointed out. And my operators wanted to punch each other after the first hour. It is something to where you have to truly understand that both guys are going to aggravate one another, hopefully at the right time with the scoring in mind, to the point that the team overall will succeed. And yes, your ego may have to take a step back about maybe it's not right. You're DXing right now. That mult is not the most important thing right now. Maybe, on the other hand, the run rate needs to suffer to get that mult. And so your operators have to have a very consistent idea of what will be best for the team overall when working as a runner and in-band partner station.
It strikes me that this is a very specific challenge also because we've talked as the contest crew about practice. Randy, you've brought it up. Dan, you've brought it up. Chris has brought it up, that practice is absolutely critical. But I've never heard anybody say, I'm practicing with my in-band guy. So I'm presuming you just show up and you have to figure this all out during the contest, which adds an entire level of challenge, correct?
Or the more you've practiced just operating in general, the more equipped you'll be to do in-band or to share a band with another guy, because it's really about having some mental cycles left over. Yes, you're trying to have to concentrate to work people, but it's also having an awareness of what's going on the other side. And sometimes just you can tell if they get, especially if you know who the guy's calling, sometimes you know it's going to be a difficult QSO. He might have to send the call sign a couple of times. You may have to you just, in the end, it becomes a matter of relaxing a little bit and saying, okay, even though if I'm the run guy, I don't need to go to 95% duty cycle. I can wait. I can give the in-band guy an extra 5 seconds or whatever he needs. Nobody's going to come steal my frequency. But you're right. You often, the only time you get to practice is when you both sit down, and that's why a lot of stations really struggle with it because, like I said, there are some people. I would be very bad at being a run guy with an in-band. I'm not. I've done single up for so long. I can't imagine. Wait, why are you interrupting me? Go away. So,
and that's why I think it's super, super important to have a guy like Tim as your in-band guy. Tim always downplays his running ability. He can actually run really, really fast, especially on phone. I mean, he's had 350 plus hours from ZF1A. I would love to have him as my run guy, but he brings so much more value to your team as your in-band guy because A, he understands what he's doing. B, he's able to motivate other people on your team to understand how to do it. And that's he's really understood where his value lies. And yeah, can he run just as fast as us? He probably could, but he's going to provide a lot more to the team by being the in-band guy. And I think it's pretty awesome that he's taken that role on as his key role, because it is such an important role when you get to these, multi-ops where you're trying to get the maximum score. You have to be able to do in-band properly, and he's the guy to do it on our team.
Yeah, one of the things I love hearing about is the energy that gets created with a multi-op team and the camaraderie that you're talking about, the training. Dan, how do you compensate for that when you're a single op all by yourself? Got to stay motivated. You've got to be the person that bonks yourself on the head if you do something wrong. How do you get in the moment to do all that by yourself?
I think the hardest part is to stay motivated, and that, I think, the thing that is the downfall of watching the scoreboard. We've talked about this before. Is, if you see you're doing really well, maybe you're not going to be as motivated to do more 2B SIQ. And I think that the key to maximizing your score as a single operator is to be motivated and to go all out whenever you can. And I tried to stick to that this weekend because I knew this was a special opportunity for me personally, because WPX Side Bend is our big multi-multi at ND7K. And I knew this was the one and only opportunity that I was going to have to do a single op. And so I really did stay focused, stay motivated, and I was able to, because to me, in-band at a multi-op is almost similar to the 2B SIQ, especially on phone. Like you're going to make yourself angry by transmitting on the other side and you're trying to listen, so you're going through those same emotions, but you're also trying to maximize your score. And I think that's the key there, is just to, not get lazy, and actually do the hard work to get those bigger scores.
So if you're comparing the two, then you just get upset with yourself because you're the other guy.
Yeah. You should see the gab message I had in my contest log. I was like, this idiot over here keeps talking. Oh, wait, that's me.
So when you're all done, you need a therapist.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
before we wrap up, are there other tips or things that you gleaned from the WPX weekend that would be helpful to people that are listening?
we were very lucky at somewhere in the third hour of the contest. Andy, N2NT, was operating, and he goes to 40 meters, and he gets a frequency in the mosh pit, so like 7170 or something like that. And I remember seeing him start up there calling CQ, and I'm thinking, oh, what the heck is he doing in there? It's impossible to hear anybody. And then I fell asleep. I wake up 3 hours later, and they've worked 500 QSOs on that frequency. And it was amazing what it did for our score. We had more QSO points on 40, mostly due to that 3 hours of running where we were working Europeans and USA at double points, than we had on the other bands where we worked 2,000 QSOs. And so it really highlighted the fact that from a scoring perspective in WPX, and this is true in phone NCW, you've really got to pound 40 if you can. Because even when it doesn't feel great, like on the second night, we had an hour, I don't know, it wasn't that great. It was 90-something on 40. But when you look at the points, that's the equivalent of 180 hour or so on the other band. So we were trying to pay attention to QSO points per hour rather than QSOs per hour. And WPX, because of the double points, that's more important than probably any other contest.
The biggest thing I believe that I gleaned from this contest up at Chris's station in Yarmouth is how important a low noise floor is. And what happened before the contest is Chris is on generator power. He doesn't have commercial power because it's so rural where this land is at. There is commercial power. It's going to take a lot of money to run it in, especially underground, which is key. So what we had, though, was some issues because of the generator. And maybe an hour before the contest, 2 hours before the contest, here's this time in which we're usually on the radio trying to break stuff, etc. But we needed to actually take the time to make new chokes for the power and or figure out, I wonder if this extension cable for 120 volts should come in through this window or that window. How can we add chokes with ferrite to eliminate this noise on 40 meter that is only existent on this one given antenna? And I think a lot of people, myself included, when I was in a city lot, it'd just be like, throw up my hands. It's just the way that it is, right? But unfortunately, for them, as we've learned at ND7K and now up in Yarmouth this weekend, you're going to give up so many layers of people that you can hear and work. And so Chris looked at me and I said, Chris, this is actually important, regardless of what anybody else here may say or think. We need to be able to work those layers like peeling the layers off an onion. And if we can work those layers, you will get to that 4,000 Q range a lot better. We only have so many transmit antennas. We don't have the big muscle. But if we can hear, well, then you know what? We'll be able to work guys who are calling us because we're going to be running them all the weekend. And that in-band guy, if he can't hear somebody, he surely can't work him, even if the packet spot tells him it's there. So we spent a lot of time on making sure that even with a generator that's just maybe 12, 15 feet away from the transmitters outside of the shack, we made sure that we had the best noise floor possible. And through the weekend, we continually found guys that were S0, S1 that we would have never heard on some of these openings that were calling us. We could put them in the log and we could move on. And so that was a very big realization. It echoed what we have at ND7K. And I think because of it, especially as Chris gets commercial power later on or continues to quell the noise from a generator, he's going to have phenomenal scores. He has them now, but they are just going to improve more and more over time. And I think that noise floor is something that is oftentimes overlooked when we look at big towers, big Yagis, et cetera, or amplifiers. If you can simply invest in some ferrite, some ground rods, and use them appropriately, there's lots of publications out there. K9YC is somebody that I go to left and right, his publications. If you can use those things to quiet your station down, I think it pays in dividends that we oftentimes overlook.
It's one of the strengths of my station at home is I have very low noise here. So hearing, there are a lot of guys that are really weak that call in, and if you can put them in the log, that's bonus QSOs. And then at V47, we have line noise that comes and goes depending on the time of day, and nothing wears you down more than the tick, tick, tick of line noise covering guys up, or listening to the noise blanker, distort their signals all for an hour.
And then last thing for me, kind of on a high level, we were very fortunate at ND7K to have big stacks in multiple directions. And I think the station design really, really came to fruition in this contest. There were times where 10 meters was open to both Europe and JA at the same time, and being able to have 8/8/8/8 to Europe and 7/7 to JA at the exact same time, split direction, it really does make a big difference because now you're super loud in both directions. Instead of having a small antenna on your secondary direction, having very large stacks to the key directions. I think all the work that Tim did at ND7K really showed itself well, especially in a contest like this where you have overlapping openings to the key areas. And I can't think of anything that changed the score more than that ability. And I think being the only station to ever get over 5,000 Qs in this contest, so I ended up with like 5,040 or so this time. I think that's all due to the fact of the flexibility of the big stacks in multiple directions. So if you wanted to score big, you gotta play big.
Good stuff, guys. I really appreciate you all joining me. I've been talking to Randy Thompson, K5ZD, Dan Craig, N6MJ, and newcomer Tim Coker, N6WIN. We might have you back again. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
See ya.